So my favorite part of running these sessions, even though I love the presentations and I'm truly appreciative of the hard work that has gone into them. Bless. I really love the conversational kind of part of it because, sometimes it gets funny, sometimes it gets really deep and meaningful, but a lot of knowledge can be transferred through the exchange of through a yarn, sharing of stories, sharing of perspective. What we always like to finish off with is a panel discussion. However, I have a personal obsession with a format that's known as the yarning circle. And instead of me being able to bask in the spotlight of facilitating all the conversations, it allows us to be a little bit more democratic on how things go. So we're gonna try the yarning circle as basically just a talking warm up. You guys had a little bit of a break, but just before you go into the main event, you also need to make sure your chops are good. And we're going to ask each other some questions just to kind of get the ball rolling, and just in between your conversations and your food and your experience, maybe some of those questions that you had in the presentation time, we'll start firing off as well. So, are y'all ready to have some fun? Timid, very timid, but it's okay. Are y'all ready to have some fun? Yeah. That's the energy I was looking for earlier. And I'm happy that you guys have actually shown that you're capable of it. So again, we're gonna have a little bit of a pass around, but eventually we're gonna have a full dialogue with our whole community here because we're full of interesting people. And I would also like to introduce Dr. Jenny Garden, who's joining us on the panel today. Because she is the principal of Living Cities at Edge Impact. Yeah. And has a wealth of knowledge from urban ecology, and very delighted to have Jenny to also add some perspectives and to be part of our yarn. So welcome, Jenny.
Thank you.
And because people have not met you yet, I figured, got to get Jenny the first question, right? And I am aware that prior to working a lot in the urban landscapes and in that kind of consulting, you were an ecologist. So, we just want know more a little bit of your story. So could you give us a little bit of insight on how the transition was from ecologist to working in urban areas? And then on top of that, with the work that you're doing now, how do you think design processes could be accentuated with people like your background ecologist involved in the design process?
Sure. Thanks, Ken. Thanks for the invitation. And I got sent the questions just earlier this afternoon, so I've made some notes, so you'll excuse if I do a little bit of referring to my notes here. So I've actually always been specialising in urban ecology. So through my PhD and my postdoc, it's always been a focus on urban ecology and landscape ecology. For me, it was always just a natural fit because urban areas are often built in landscapes that were historically very high in biodiversity and ecosystem services on those sort of flat sort of plains around waterways, coastal areas, that sort of thing. And so what we find is that urban areas now actually contain some of the last remaining hotspots and refuges for certain species that are specific to those type of ecosystems. So urban areas can play and do play a critical role in biodiversity conservation. So I've always been interested in how we can do urban areas better, if we want to put it that way, for people, but also for biodiversity. How do we create that better balance? And it really does require things changing in how we've always done things. And over the last 20 years or so, I've been working in this field, and I'm now starting to see this significant shift, which is really positive. Would have been great to have seen it 20 years ago, but it's great to see it now. And the other important thing around the urban areas, it's also now the place where most people in the world live and work. When I was doing my PhD, it was less than 50% of people were in urban areas. I remember writing my thesis and being like, you know, we'll soon be more than half people in the world, you know, live in urban areas. And now we're at that point, and we've exceeded that point, and we're continuing to exceed that point. So urban areas typically are not healthy. You know, they're hot, they're these sort of built surfaces. We don't get to engage very much in nature, and so it's really even more important to bring nature and the environment into the built environment where most people now live and work, both for the experience it provides, but for the huge mental health and well-being benefits that greenery and nature brings to people and also to wildlife. So that's the transition part. In terms of how I think ecology can sort of incorporate and accentuate the design process by having an ecologist involved, I've got so many dot points on this, right? Like loads. I'm going to try and highlight some of the main ones. So I think it's essential, basically, that ecologists are involved in just about every process of the design, every part of the design process. So it can happen at a site level, where ecologists are brought in to establish a baseline, to advise on areas that are important to protect and minimise disturbance, to advise on design types that can help minimise impact on species or systems, on waterways, that sort of thing. Creating structures that basically harmonise with the natural environment. And we'll see, and I'm hoping everyone here in the room is familiar with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Show of hands. Anyone not familiar with it? Oh, wow. Okay, I'm excited to introduce you all to the KMGBF. So this came out of COP15 in December last year. And it basically replaces the previous global biodiversity targets, the Aichi targets, and it is a set of 4 global goals and 23 targets, which are essentially trying to achieve, you might have heard 30%, 30 by 30. Have you heard that being bandied around now? 30 by 30. So that's actually target 3 of 23 targets, which is all about biodiversity, ecosystem conservation, and trying to achieve 30% conservation of habitat types by 2030. So there's this interim 2030 goal, and then there's a stretch goal of 2050 where we're trying to achieve no net loss of biodiversity by 2050 so that we're actually living in harmony with nature. And this is going to have huge implications for the built environment and for industry and for organisations in having to meet different policies that governments will be setting, reporting targets, demonstrating how they're helping to achieve this global target. Australia is actually on the, I think it's called the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. So there are 190 something countries that signed on to the KMGBF. Australia is one of the 119 countries that signed on to the High Coalition Ambition for Nature and People. So we are going to be showcasing how we can achieve 30 by 30. So you can expect to see some big legislative changes happening, and there's already starting to happen with reviews of EPBC Act and those sorts of things happening. So get ready for that. If you haven't done so already, jump on Google, KMGBF, Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, have a look at the goals and targets and have a think about how they will influence your industry and your organisation. Aside from that, other dot points, okay. Ecosystem services and human health. How do we get more greening into urban areas, for example? So ecologists can help to advise on urban landscape design and planning principles around that. I was just talking to, I've forgotten the girl's name already. I told her I was terrible with names, the uni student here, about the 330-300 rule, which is now quickly becoming the leading sort of rule globally for how we can design urban areas and integrate greening, but do it in a way that we have equitable access to greening. So the numbers stand for every household should be able to see at least 3 trees of a decent size. They should be within a neighbourhood with at least 30% canopy cover, and they should be no further than 300 metres from a high quality green space of at least a hectare in size. So this is leading best practice now. I was in October at the Second World Forum on Urban Forests in DC presenting there, and it is going like wildfire, this 330, 300. And it is, yeah, well, there we go. So it's quickly becoming leading best practice and something to look out for. See, ecologists can help you, let you know what's happening.
And how about one more?
One more, education and advocacy. So we can really help sort of increase not just public awareness, but also industry and government awareness around some of these really important impacts. Now, one of the things when we're looking at site assessments is looking at sort of the baseline flora, fauna and soil condition, which is my segue into asking Sam, do you feel soil health can become a key performance indicator of projects across land use, agriculture or development?
Heck yeah.
Yeah. Soil health, KPI.
Yeah, KPI. I thought about this a little bit in the car, but I think there's a bunch of things that it's going to take time, obviously. I think it's the education piece that's starting, and just talking about it here, about the importance of biology and how it interacts in our ecosystem and how it supports everything that we live, breathe and do in our ecosystem is so important. So I think the sooner we start to educate ourselves and focus on it more, I think we'll become more prominent. I think there's going to pop up in a lot of areas, and I feel food quality and food security, it'll start to become prominent in, especially when we as the consumer start to go, I actually want food that's grown in a certain condition with a certain quality, and part of that quality measure, I believe, will be a biological measure of food. When it will be, I'm not sure. I think it's some distance off, but education's the seeding that start. So the other part that I think is the carbon sequestration game, obviously, like that's a big thing. And I think it's good, but I think it's missing the point of most of the big commercial schemes aren't even looking at biology or from anything from that nature. We're not really aware of it. A lot of people talk about biology. We probably all say, oh, soil biology is great, but we actually have no idea what it means, what it does, what's the effect of it or anything. So I think it'll definitely pop up in that sense as well, that it will become more of a marker in there, especially with fungi creating stable humus by absorbing carbon or sequestering carbon. So it's going to start, I believe, in the next 10 years, we'll see it in everything linked to food. Biodiversity credits will definitely have linkages to that in there as well, I really feel. I think we'll see it a lot more going forward, and definitely I think people will start to put KPIs on the quality of it. We're already testing for biology in laboratories now, and we can do it in a million ways. That'll become more common. And I think that definitely, I'd like to see it one day where you can actually get encouraged, or someone can sponsor or buy you a credit to actually rejuvenate the ground and also rejuvenate the biology in that, sphere to then do better things. So, hello, can you ask a question yet?
We'll just get through this round. Hold that question.
Jeez, I'm going to get pummeled at the end. Yeah. So I think, in short, education is the start to all of this, and just leave here and start having conversations about everything I yarned on about before. Yeah. Get it fun. Whatever I yarned on about.
Trust the process.
Yeah. Jeez, there's a process. Just go and talk about it and bring it up. And it's no different. Some IT work I do, one of our guys were buying a new piece of software, and one of the guys doing the procurement just said, have you guys got a net zero ambition for your business? And they're going, what are you talking about? And it's all of that, us as a consumer asking the question, is this regenerative or is this organic? Or how do you grow this? And we can lead the change. And be the same if we start asking about, do you actually know anything about biology, or do you take care of it, or do you use fungicide, which basically decimates fungi? It's sort of this thing we need to be aware of. So I don't know if that answered the question, really.
That's great.
All right, wicked. Now I'm going to get a helping hand. Ash, mate. What were?
Oh,
Ken, come on.
make it up as you go. Make it up as you go. It was just a helping guide.
What were some of the more difficult obstacles to overcome to establishing Australia's first and one of the world's first biodiversity credits?
Yeah. Where do you start? Okay, so and it evolves, right? The challenges tomorrow are different to the challenges today. I think the first thing was the concept in and of itself before this was a thing. So it's certainly not on me. I've got an incredible but small team of subject matter experts who come from conservation, environmental markets, have a history of engaging in, and ecologists, of course. And so the first thing was, okay, well, what is our methodology? What is our standard? And what's the existing legislation or infrastructure that could build confidence in what we do? So that was critical. Finding an investor that would put money into it, who is very patient and has a long vision of the opportunity. Bringing on team members who could fill gaps, who were willing to take a risk to join a business that has absolutely no assurance of its survival. We launched before Montreal COP15. We launched before Australia's government made any announcements around protecting 30 by 30. So we launched with a platform that focused on both individuals who wanted to protect 10 square metre bundles through to businesses. And that's just trying to find out who is your customer. And that's evolved and evolving very fast. And it's one of the reasons why we're here today, is because we've identified an opportunity to solve a business problem. There's been a lot of challenges, and we're certainly far from out of the weeds yet. It's going to be a long time before we can prove ourselves as a viable business, and that's what we are. So if we're not able to show that we're viable, we won't hang around. But we've kind of grappled with every one of these challenges as a startup, willing to be agile and willing to evolve, and to really just get the word out there as much as we can. All right, my turn to ask a question. Sam, so you spoke a bit about how you see the future and how there's evolution and adaptation in works that you do. I'm interested to understand, slight tweak on the question, what are the barriers for you to fulfill that and for others to get on board in terms of new practices?
Yeah, it's...
Question without notice, actually. I just recognised.
You got it. This is how we do it. Shoot from the hip.
In terms of barriers, just starting with DUS, we've always been able to kind of side door our way into these kind of demonstrator projects in a odd enough way. We've been able to partner with an organisation early on, before a project brief is even written or as it's being written, to sort of find a way in to then facilitate a grant funding application, and then to, for something to go on and become a kind of demonstrator project. I think the barrier is actually in sort of traditional procurement of project processes. Really, I think there's a kind of alignment to, not necessarily consciously, but an alignment to business as usual when most projects are procured. And I think that comes from some of those traditional structures that are very deeply embedded in how the built environment is done. What I was just thinking about your sort of mention of ecology being a key factor through the whole process, and I was just thinking, in that, I talked a little bit about project team structures and a more sort of collaborative, involved structure very early on in the project. Yeah. I just wonder what would happen if you had that influence of ecology right at the beginning, informing a client group or an investor or a government body is trying to undertake, say a significant development project, and then being able to sort of steer or guide on certain lines of thinking that are normally outside of how these things are usually procured. I think there's a really interesting line of thought into that. We've sort of got this complexity in the built environment now, which is branching out into more and more areas of specialization. And yet we're still in, for the most part, a very traditional sort of linear process of procurement and undertaking projects.
And it's essential, I think it's an essential way that things need to shift. And one of the most annoying things, I think, and it does a disservice, I think, to the built environment as well, is ecologists are often brought in almost as the last step. And, okay, well, what's the minimum we need to do to adhere to regulation or to say that we're green? And that's not the way it should be. The conversation should be, how are we going to demonstrate that we're leaders in this space and we're serious about getting nature into cities, because we know it's better for our own health and well-being, it's better for the environment, it's better for biodiversity. Please tell us. Exactly, it's better for the economies, exactly. So from the very start, come tell us, what sort of things should we be thinking about? And I think I mentioned it earlier, it's going to require development and design and thinking to be done differently to how we've done it.
And it's kind of like when you're mentioning like the built environment being a complex thing, it's not like it's totally become it. It's just more things that we have to consider. But in reality, the built environment has always been the crux of a lot of flow-on effects. Like, so for instance, this morning, I happened to be invited to participate in a climate risk workshop from the Department of Energy and Water here. Environment and Water. And some of these highlights were sort of like, they're like, okay, what gets hit first? It's like from a lot of these climate risks or biodiversity risks. It's like the built environment. The built environment gets hit, and then there's the ongoing social, economic, actually nature and built environment get hit first, and then everything schools on from there. So it kind of is also this other aspect. There's an aspect of the built environment being very front-facing leadership and showing what can be done, but at the same time, it's like it's also our defense against a lot of risks. So how are we actually going to react to that? Feel free to respond to that if any of y'all had a light bulb moment on that. Yeah, sounds great. But we did have a question right here, so we just wanted to make sure that gets slopped up, and then that can start to make sure our little yarn here continues to encapsulate the rest of us here.
Sam, that was for you. I'm just keen to get your thoughts on vertical farming.
Oh yeah. Interesting, but I think it comes down to the medium that it's grown in probably. Like we're talking about monocultured vertical farming, or we're talking about
I don't know what that means.
Single plant. We should all get the hang of the word monoculture, because I go on about that a lot, but monoculture is like we grow the same plant on a mass amount of area. So you look at a wheat field, that's a monocultured field, that's one plant.
You
so
go on about it a lot in terms of we shouldn't be doing monoculture.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, because a monoculture plant only feeds monocultured biology. So basically you're restricting that whole movement, and there's no biodiversity in a monocultured environment. I was just saying before, I go off topic, I go hiking a lot, and I go hiking in SA Forestry's prime plantation versus a national park. The diversity in there and the wildlife is chalk and cheese. There's nothing in a prime plantation, but in a park. So back to you.
I guess the angle I was coming from was probably, I don't think they even use soil. I think it's just nutrient.
Hydroponic, probably. Yeah.
Exactly. And there's, because I've spoken to people that work there, and they say there's a lot of cleaning to make sure, there's no unwanted bacteria and fungi.
Tony knows my opinion on hydroponics, but I'll be diplomatic about it. It's not food. It's really not food. I think it's considered food because it looks like a piece of food.
Right.
But when you start to learn about soil biology and how important the organism structure is in the nutrient cycle and nutrient density in a piece of food, one day as humans we'll learn that it's that's the most important part of the food. And then we'll go, ooh, that food that's grown in a bath of liquid where synthetic inputs are only put into there to meet an XYZ equation, there's a problem there. Albrecht, what's his name? Back in the day we had nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, and that's how we've grown food forever. And now it's like, oh, we actually need all these other things to go around that. So there's obviously a bit of contention around that, but I think we'll see hydroponics will have to be there for a volume of food, but one day we'll learn that hydroponic food is not decent, rich, density food that we can get grown in another environment. So
There's an ecological evidence base for that as well.
Love it.
To add into that. So koalas, you may be aware, only eat a handful of eucalypt species. So of all the hundreds of eucalypt species we've got in Australia, they eat a handful of them. Of the species that they eat, they will preferentially browse on individual trees within a stand. And within that individual tree, preferentially feed on different branches. And that comes down to the soil.
So they're extremely fussy, is what you're trying to say.
But because that's right, so eucalyptus leaves are very low in nutrient content anyway, so they need to eat a lot, and they preferentially,
They're teaching us?
Yeah, no. But they preferentially eat certain leaves and trees because of the soil that these trees are growing on and their nutrient-rich soils.
There's there's so much more to this and our Indigenous Australians and Indigenous cultures can teach us a lot in this space of listening and the signalling from the landscape. And we're kind of figuring it out a little bit now through like quorum sensing, it's called. But you think about when say a cabbage moth flies over a bunch of brassicas or say broccoli, and it's like, how does it know which one to eat? Why doesn't it decimate everything?
The one in my garden because it's the best.
It won't be the best. And when you start to learn about, they actually have, most insects have antennae that then detect the plant's strength, and it's an immunity thing. If they're attacking the plant's weak and sick. So when we're having to pump everything full of antibiotics and popping up an equation, the plant is not well. We're just keeping it on life support. What happens if a human's on life support? Could we give birth to someone and keep the baby, well? Pretty unlikely, it's like animals, it's everything. We just got to think about simple equation. If we're healthy and functioning, we reproduce and we live, but when our systems become broken down, we start to see the cracks forming, and that's hydroponics 101 in my opinion. So
diplomatic to the end. We had a question over there, sir.
In terms of, I heard the name ecosystem services mentioned a couple of times, so it's probably for ash and sand. Coming from Europe, you can probably see a very different market in terms of government subsidies, whereas in Australia you have more a market approach to it. Looking at the state of it, is it to you more a sort of a failure of market or a failure of government that we aren't further in terms of biodiversity?
Ash, would you like to respond, and then we'll bring in Jenny?
Unless Jenny's ready to go.
No, I'm thinking about that one.
Yeah.
You go ahead.
I can't form a strong opinion on that. I'm certainly not expert enough. I would suggest at the end of the day, as humanity, where we follow where the incentive is, and where there's not carrot and stick, there's no boundaries. You're going to fail, you're going to struggle. And so for us, and I was sharing this earlier with you, Leo, one of the things that we're focusing on right now, and this kind of comes back to what are we challenged by as a business, is we need to show that what we do has integrity, that there's transparency in all that we do as a credit developer. And that's really important. At the same time, we need to show that there is a great appetite from leading businesses to want to engage in something like this. And so it's how do you create meaningful flagship case studies of engagement, and how do you show integrity in the work that you do? And that comes from both regulation and market forces. So there's a balance in those things. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it kind of pains me that in order for us to or for a lot of people and governments and industry sometimes, to value nature, biodiversity, they need to bring it down to a dollar market value. But it's the reality that we're living in. And I think there's a couple of things. Government's not putting a value on things because you start putting a value on the ecosystem services that a tree is providing over its lifetime, you're talking about huge amounts of dollars. And that's just outside of the realm of how we've looked at trees and green infrastructure. And it takes some time for people to recognise that. I mean, we can value a 200-year-old river red gum at hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of ecosystem services, and it's still got another 100, 200 years to live as well. But I think there's another aspect, is the community demand. And when the community starts valuing it, and they're not valuing it from the dollar value or the savings to their energy bills from shading provided, for example, they're valuing it because the aesthetics, it makes them feel better. They know it's cooler on a 40-degree summer day in the park or in an urban area where there's lots of greening. They're valuing it for that reason, and that community pressure then I think translates to government action as well. So I think there's a carrot and stick approach there in that sense as well. But I think generally we need to be valuing them financially, but also just from the benefits that they're providing us. They makes us happier, healthier all around.
Yes, indeed. We had a question in the back, another one, and we'll come to the front.
So it's also about driving change. It's partly comment, partly question. So we've talked about the need for education. I think that was you, Sam. And it's pretty clear that philosophy's not going to do much, putting philosophy out there. We've had plenty of it. What strikes me is that what people recognise as a problem-solving tool or opportunity-creating tool is going to have more traction. And Sam, you sort of mentioned coming in through side doors and finding the opportunities to put a problem-solving tool in front of potential clients. I think in a way, like they wanted to achieve certain things and you had a better solution and you were able to get that in front of them. And the challenge though is brought in that, and I'll just say, Sam's not only theory, he's also applied. He's been out there beginning to talk to growers and test their soil and getting interest, and talking to a composting company who's also interested in what he can tell them about the microbes and so on. So you're kind of demonstrating what might be one of the first tools in understanding the problem, and then you've got further tools for problem solving. But to me, it strikes me that that's where most of the potential strength lies, in figuring out how to get problem solving and opportunity tools in front of people.
Yeah.
And then there's also that political pressure thing, as you say, through communities waking up and so on. And then we better find a solution to that problem. But I mean,
I think the big shift in the last few years towards regenerative agriculture, and obviously it's regenerative agriculture as we farm, but we improve and leave it better than it was. The war in Ukraine drove the natural gas price up. The natural gas price went up, our fertiliser price goes up, because pretty much all the fertiliser that's used on our food comes from natural gas. So if you think about that, all the urea that we use chemically input, it's actually natural gas that's being converted. So the price of urea is up, and it's stayed up quite a lot at the moment, and that's driving farmers to go, I can't afford to fertilise. Now I'm being forced financially to find other ways. And the last few years, this space has opened up because people are having to find other alternatives to using urea as a fertiliser. It's no different to using chemical inputs, and everything's getting harder to make, it's becoming more resistant. People can see that, and it's pretty much coming down to, unfortunately, not a proactive, I'll do this and the future will be better. There's some people doing that, but most of them are doing it because it's actually, they can't profitably farm anymore. So we're unfortunate but fortunate that people are going to be forced to change, because in our climate of weather, our rain events and our cost of inputs will force people to have to change. They don't have a choice. So hedging your bets, you hedge your bets on that, I'll hedge my bets on regenerative ag. It's not going away. So, but
Do you not think there's an element of finding those champions as well, who can demonstrate
The early
an
adopters are
alternative,
big
yep,
things,
the early
yeah.
adopters demonstrate an alternative approach and that it's successful and it works, and then you'll see everyone else start to go, oh, well, I could do that as well.
Yeah, I was at a conference. Not that long ago, soil biology, and the room was divided between one of those people advocating, and I've done it, we would never go back, and the other room going, we don't have enough money to change this now, and they're going, you're stupid if you don't. Like, your kids won't have a farm, and the others are going, but we can't afford to do it, and it's that tug of war. But ultimately, the advocates will get us over the line, and the more advocates we have everywhere, the better.
Sounds like sustainable building. Sam G, wanted to allow you to kind of like respond to that as well. It's like, putting things on the forefront, questioning the brief, so to speak, like is, you already mentioned those, like you're getting runs on the board, but then what other conversations does that end up sparking on how practice is done, or opportunities that the built environment can actually create?
Yeah, I mean, I guess our approach has kind of been advocacy by stealth, in just going and trying to show it as a demonstrator. It's actually how it can be done, which I think is a great way to sort of get into it. But I was really sort of interested in that point on community pressure, because it seems to me like a lot of this discussion's revolving around kind of the economic drivers being the lowest common denominator, and that's what things are falling down to. And I was just wondering, as you were speaking there, about how can at a kind of grassroots level, how can communities kind of band together to advocate, into different levels of government, for example. And it just makes me think of this kind of other kinds of platforms, and particularly education on the benefits of greening cities and greening urban spaces, because it's sort of, I think there's as soon as there's a attributed value to that's understandable at a kind of low common denominator level, that's maybe when the conversation changes.
Yeah. And a lot of the work we do is around shifting, like in the community engagement space, is about shifting that perception. And a big focus at the moment is on trees. Trees are often viewed as dangerous. They're going to drop a limb on me, or it's going to fall over in the storm, or the bushfire, it's going to bring the fire closer to me.
Nature is scary at times.
I mean, it's terrifying, right? So there's this fear around it, or it's going to lift the pavement and I'm going to trip over it, that sort of thing. It drops berries, it drops leaves in my gutter, and it's just annoying, So there's all these negative, and the media doesn't help because it perpetuates and reports on those things all the time. So a lot of the work we do is around shifting that perception in a passive way, that people start relating more personally to trees, to greening, to nature, and therefore valuing it. So there's something in urban areas known as the extinction of experience, which is people now being born, growing up, living their life in the built environment, don't have the same experience that a lot of us had as kids, playing in the local creek, exploring the forest, whatever it might be. I remember making dams in our creek and watching the platypus climb over it and that sort of thing. So they don't have that experience, and therefore they don't value nature as much. And so there's this case for bringing nature into the city and passively engaging people so that they can value nature, appreciate it, and then want more of it and drive more of it.
Yeah. And I know we'll get to your question, James, but I just wanted to also highlight, was that sort of like the impetus to try to create even these digital sort of like formats? So it's like there's no replacing the real thing, but also through a digital medium, if you're also trying to get a little bit of an immersion of like, what are these places that we are protecting? Like, what can you see there? What can you appreciate?
Well, to Jenny's point, and it's been proven, we talk about biodiversity loss. The knowledge is out there, but knowledge doesn't change things. Experience changes things. It's this biophilia. And so exactly that. We appreciate that, our projects are often very remote. and not necessarily accessible, but we can bring them to life through other forms as best we can. But nothing beats being out in nature and connecting. And we're deeply aware too of sponsoring an off-site project, as good as that is, because it ticks a box and it has meaningful impact. But ultimately, it's about how do we impact upon where the design is or within urban settings. That is most critical.
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming increasingly implemented as well globally to have these green prescriptions. You know, doctors are actually prescribing time spent in nature for mental health and well-being and for physical health and well-being, right? Like the UK, parts of Europe, parts of the US. Green Adelaide's tried a nature prescription sort of project, trialled one as well. So it's the evidence base, but it's that experience as well. If you get out into nature, you feel better. So if we can bring that into the cities, there's so much evidence around the benefits of it.
You got a question over here, James?
Yeah, sure. This one's for Wilderlands, Knop. Firstly, I want to say the biodiversity credit system, fantastic. The philosophy behind conservation and bringing to light it's bringing the philosophy into the everyday person's perspective. Now, getting to the nitty-gritty though, in urban context, and we've been talking about integrated nature in the city for reasons such as mitigating heat island effect, mental health, ensuring there's green canopy, a park to play in for the kids nearby, high density developments as we head towards 70% of the population living in urbanised areas by 2050. So Building Council of Australia and the credit system with the nature stewardship, it slightly concerns me with the increase of achieving development approval through an additional 2-star. I don't want to criticise or see negative about it because many positive aspects, but in terms of just getting the particular approval, first I want to know, is it legislated? Is it a guideline? How does the stewardship work there? If it might mean they can get an approval which eliminates a number of remnant vegetation in an urban context that should be conserved, or there should be integrated green rooftops or vertical facades, etc., corridors for pollinators or native bees and birds and play areas. So I just wanted to sort of throw it out there. More positives towards what you're doing than negatives, but I just think we need to be mindful of not allowing approval systems that basically meet a building and planning code criteria that will increase urban heat island effect and will decrease urban ecology. So any response?
I think well-founded points. First and foremost, when it comes to the nature stewardship credit, it's above and beyond any legislative requirements for offsetting. And our credits are voluntary, so they don't fit compliance credits anyway. What we've identified, and I think what the GBCA have identified, is they've created this credit with very good intentions, but really not knowing where it fits and where the solution may exist, to be honest. Much like is what has occurred in increasing complexity around, say, carbon requirements in these tools, going from standard offsetting through to embodied carbon and so on. We expect and we want there to be more sophistication when it comes to engaging with biodiversity credits. As it currently stands, you just need to support a project in the domestic bounds of Australia. You know, that doesn't really stack up. What would be great is if there's requirements around, well, it needs to be certain proximity, needs to reflect certain ecosystem requirements and alignments. That's certainly what we're going to be advocating for internally. I guess as it stands now, we've seen an opportunity and we're going for it. And then we want to internally help advocate for how do we make this even better. Say, for instance, the minimum requirement of management, active management through the credit at the moment is 5 years. We do 20 years. How can we actually advocate for that bar to be raised? So I think it's a very well-meaning and well-considered first step. Yeah.
Can I chime in on
Yes,
that one
of course.
as well? So just a couple of things that spring to mind is examples globally of what other countries are doing in that space as well. So I think the world's currently looking towards the UK at the moment. They recently changed their Environment Act to require a 10% biodiversity net gain to be demonstrated on all new developments. And that's huge. So have a look at that. Singapore has just recently adopted the same approach. And on GBCA, we are currently developing their nature roadmap as well. So things are about to change from a GBCA perspective as well, and having a look at how the building industry can align better with the KMGBF targets, with that global goal from a site surround supply chain sort of perspective.
I was just going to add to that. What sprung to mind for me was about having, developing policy framework that encourages both. I mean, I think it's a totally valid point about the idea of offsetting being having the possibility to be misused. I think it's about having the correct sort of frameworks and checks and balances around the use of it to make sure it's used in the way that it's intended. But what I was going to say is taking a building development, it's always going to have an impact. And I think it's just important to balance both together.
Yeah, and then there's always the conversation around, especially urban development or urban fringe development from an ecological standpoint, definitely has a lot of hotspots. However, if it's already been developed, then it probably is stagnant. So in terms of scale, I guess scale of ecology, there could be really good opportunities in enhancing those conservation areas. And unless strategically kind of done, can one individual project really be the catalyst of those kind of things? And I guess that's where it becomes scales. One single development to master plan would probably have a much bigger effect. Whilst conservation and making sure that biodiversity thrives in those kind of areas to be able to hopefully flow back into urban areas would probably be probably more of like the scale kind of conversation rather than every single project. But we had a question down here. Yara?
I have a comment to the guys online.
Okay.
There's a really good book called Only One Earth, The Care and Maintenance of One Small Planet by Barbara Ward from 1972. If anyone's interested, it's the basis for donut economics, which I'm hoping everyone has read it. Because we're all, it's a safe space. We all know donut economics. But it just goes to show that this book was written in 72. Donut economics is 10 years old?
Could be old.
We're a bit slow on the update, but we're getting there.
Yeah. Comment.
We commented generally before about the value and the value position in economics and how we can shift the conversation. So we are shifting it for the grace.
And truly understand planetary limits, and to be able to design accordingly or start from the spots around what is potentially like holding capacity in different ecologies, if that drives the brief, which usually it doesn't. You had a question in the back, Mauricio, but you got to project your voice.
No worries. My question is more for Jenny. Sorry, Dr. Jenny. It's a really specific one. Sorry if it's the last one. So sorry. But you just mentioned this. UK has 10% biodiversity votes, and that the standard now is the 330 we have, which we're trying to embed in the Greater Adelaide Regional Plan. Okay? But in that view of the Earth and everything, we always miss the understory of the canopy. We always measure trees, health, development, everything. But if you take the best concepts in Adelaide, like algae, birds, and everything, they have amazing trees and amazing parks. Like taking trees out, the parks are grasslands. Sorry, logos, that's it. Of course, there's good trees. Do you know any benchmark at the moment about planting garden volumes or areas of new developments? The furthest I can see is just 10% of our park to have gardens. That's nothing.
So it's a great question. I've got a couple of thoughts around it. So my PhD work showed that exact thing, that the structural complexity of a site was most important for biodiversity, diversity at a site. So you're absolutely right. You could plant trees and have a lawn and it might be fine for koalas, but you're going to get not much else. So that structural complexity is hugely important. There's no specific benchmark for general greening. But to talk about the UK's 10% biodiversity net gain, what they actually require is for a site they've identified 3 main habitat types in the UK. So they've got hedgerows and forest, riverine, and then basically everything else, right? And so if all 3 of those habitat types are present on the site, you have to demonstrate a 10% net gain in each habitat type. So it's not 10% net gain across the whole site, it's in each habitat type that's represented on the site pre-development. So that requires whatever structural complexity formulates that sort of habitat. So I guess in that sense, that's one way of bringing in things that other than trees. So they use the biodiversity metric, which is how they measure and quantify their habitat and biodiversity scores at sites. I know there are other various tools in Australia which try and score ecological value or biodiversity value, and they often use vegetation or canopy cover as a proxy, which I don't think is a good approach. I've developed a tool at Edge, our urban ecological value tool, which takes a much deeper dive in scoring diversity and does have a look at representation of different strata and flora fauna diversity at the site and landscape connectivity and size and shape of the patch, all those sorts of landscape ecology important theories. So in short, there's no benchmark I can think of for greening other than trees, but some of these approaches coming through are trying to represent those habitat complexities rather than just canopy cover.
And Sam, could you, I was like, yeah, you definitely want to say something like that, but you had a fantastic diagram as well as, how like the maturation and like how these things interconnect.
Yeah.
So could you also talk about maybe the missing middle of
missing
landscape?
middle. I just thought the classic example for that is why we've got so many magpies, and I love magpies, but you think of magpies like trees and bare ground with no mid-story. So we're breeding environments in our urban areas that these birds like, so that. Anyway, aside from that, I was like, there are actually under regenerative agriculture standards, the regenerative certifications now are actually looking for biodiversity and stories of plants. So there is a lot more focus on that. To become a regenerative certified farm, you actually have to meet the certifications of 20 species of low level, mid level, high level. The other thing I'd hope to see is that like permaculture's not the be all and end all, but there's certainly things in there that we as Australians can learn from, that our world can. 2 Australians from Tasmania created permaculture, and permaculture is all about a lot of things, but one of the things is about stories of layers and the interconnection and how it supports. And I would see inevitably that is going to become a benchmark. In a landscape that evolves, we think naturally, I was saying to someone earlier that it starts as a grass, then it evolves into a bush, and then like a shrub, and then a tree, doesn't it? We're sort of missing a whole bunch of steps, and missing that, we're missing this biological piece. So these trees then are ending up in an environment where they've got nothing to support them fungally around them, apart from grass. So then the trees are living in bacteria, the trees are weak, the trees are sick, and all of these things. So we see this already in the heat island effect. Trees can't cope with it because they're not sharing moisture, they're not uptaking. So there's so many things about it. I think we will start to definitely focus on it more, like we have to focus on it more, that there's an interconnection there, and the sooner we figure that out, the better. So.
Yeah, for sure. Got a question down here, sir?
Just a quick one to Sam then. The Australian native eucalyptus, one of their growing mechanisms is to drop the leaves, and the leaves sterilise the soil so that no other plants can compete with it. How does that fit into it?
Well, yeah, and it's an interesting thing, isn't it? But, it's generally bare under eucalyptus, but not far away. There's often other, plants, isn't there? But there's a lot of plants that drop tannins or toxins out of them that then kill biology, and eucalyptus is one that under eucalyptus, there's only very certain types of fungi that actually survive in there, and they need certain associate plants to actually help the tree get its nutrients via it. So if we don't have those surrounding plants, the tannins that the eucalyptus have sterilised the ground with and only had certain types of fungi there, those other plants aren't there to translocate those nutrients to that fungi. So the tree is fine like that, but we need the things surrounding and out of it. Like if you think of landscape, the eucalyptus are here, but outside of that, then there's generally always a marshed or a grassed area, and the fungi actually goes generally out from that further. So, but it's a good point because it is a pretty big thing. But don't think about the interconnection being tree, bush. Think about the interconnection being tree, actually bushes over here, and they're actually interconnected through subsoil, like medium of fungi. So,
I mean, just, to a certain degree, if any, I'm not a religious Gardening Australia watcher, but I do know some. And the thing that does come up a lot is like companion planting, right? But then there's a lot of people, I mean, I don't hear a lot when we're think about like the inside outside of projects, and then we're like, where's the companion palette? Or it's like for instance, like, oh, we're using a native plant palette. It's like, well, is that native plant palette actually good for each other, or are there companion sort of ecosystems or things of that nature? It'd be really fascinating to also take that lens to even landscape design around like what are the companion ecosystems that really need to be in here to really create that.
Ask our Indigenous friends that.
Yeah.
They know these answers that we don't need to figure this stuff out. Like it's already figured out. So
It's not even it's not just about what are the companion plants and the native plants, but what are the species that are going to be best for our future climates as well. And it may be quite different to what our current planting palette is like. And very controversially, it may include non-native species, right? That can fulfill a similar niche.
Yeah. I'm always a stickler on time, and we're getting kind of close to that as I feel like the energy of this conversation is really bubbling up. And usually I try to do something quite creative on an exit kind of question, but maybe I'll try to ask, get a little bit of help from my friends. Is there something we missed that we can kind of do as an exit question? Yes.
What's the best way to inject play and or fun into the work that you do that you've seen made a difference for people?
How do we inject fun into the things that you do and advocate? Or play? Thank you.
So many ways. Yeah. I mean, nature. What's not to like about nature, right? I love my job. One of the things we do around community engagement are our tree tags. Some of you may have seen them up around various local councils here, which talk about the benefits that trees provide to people and convert it into relatable metrics, right? One way that those are sometimes deployed are as tree trails, which encourage the kids' families to walk the trail, get out in nature, learn about the tree benefits, but do a bunch of other activities along the way as well. So we have a brochure, and they can do a scavenger hunt as they're going along. So find a bird sitting in a tree, or someone sitting in the shade of a tree, or a leaf that smells like lemon, you know, if there are lemon-scented gums along the trail, a tree with smooth bark, a tree with rough bark, those sorts of things. So the tree trails are hugely popular, particularly for young kids, and getting them out there and interacting in nature and having fun.
Right on. Hit him young. Sam, some fun.
All right. I think growing things, like, you know, and the connection of that, and that then alludes to supporting the garden, is like learn how to compost. I have a worm farm, you know, learn these things that you're taking something and you're converting it into something with biology in there that then you're putting onto the food you eat, you know. So just learn those systems and the things that we can use to, it's just such a fun thing. Like, I think having a worm farm is, when it's working, it's great, you know. But understanding that there's these creatures and looking at the worms, and I'm fascinated by them, you know. Have a beehive, you know. Don't talk to me about my bees at the moment, though. So, you know, just connect with these things, you know. And I think understanding teaching our children where our food's coming from, and then what we can do to, you know, reuse, and the scraps going somewhere, you know. I think just understanding and connecting with that on top of the nature thing's a big thing. But yeah, go to some classes, compost, have a worm farm, you know.
Yeah. Thanks, Sam. Sam G?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few things we do to have fun. But the biggest one, my background's probably, my most experience is in sort of school and education projects. And some of the younger cohorts are the really fun ones because we can have more fun with sort of using elements of the building as a communication device, lots of colour, like an intensity of the sort of experience and identity. But above all of that, what I've seen is putting learning front and centre. So even the small things, like beyond all of that, having garden beds that the kids can actually interact with and get into and get dirty, encouraging risk taking, just things like rock scrambles and climbing logs and that kind of thing to address level changes rather than putting up barriers and balustrades, sort of both philosophically and literally. I think integrating a learning experience in the sort of everyday sort of life experience and use of a place.
Yeah, especially with nature. Now I'm getting a little bit of a theme of the kids are the fun, or the children are the fun.
I've got another one for adults at the end.
But fun in communicating about conservation as well as opportunities with biodiversity.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we launched with was this idea of being able to engage with individuals who can have a meaningful impact even at 1 square metre at a time or 10 square metres at a time. And if this is the last chance to say anything, I want to thank Ken and ASBN for the opportunity to come here tonight and also to acknowledge that a small contribution has been made. And this picture is from our Coorong Lakes project, and the tall point there is Mount Sandy. And the support tonight has gone to help protect the 50 square metres of that project, which is pretty much the equivalent of footprint of this building. So being able to bring that back to understanding and experience, whether you can touch it or not, certainly through storytelling and other forms of experience and technology we can. But for us, it's about bringing that back to you can have an impact, your business can have an impact, but you can have an impact as well.
So fun.
Can I have one more?
One more. Bonus.
One more bonus for the adults. Citizen science. Get out there, Google what citizen science projects are happening in your area, get involved in a BioBlitz, download iNaturalist, figure out what's in your backyard, whether it's plants or animals or insects, whatever it is, and just get out there and record and be interested. There was a term used at the World Forum about re-entangling ourselves with nature, and we just need to do that.
I like that. And on that note, could you please join me in thanking our fantastic presenters and panel members. Thank you so much for your perspectives, your inspiration as advocacy, and also passion for these areas. And once again, thank you to all of you who have spent this time with us. I hope you had a fantastic experience. That's first and foremost. And thank you for supporting the ASBN through another fantastic year. Because this is our last educational event, of the year, I would like to make sure that the people that do dedicate a good portion of their time outside of other responsibilities get a shout out. So could the ASBN team in the back please stand up? Would the real ASBN people please stand up? We have Mauricio, Christina, Carrie, and then we also have Renee. We also have a slew of other people behind the scenes as well that were unable to make it tonight, which includes George, Kiralee, Marina, and am I missing? No, we good. Tin. And that's, sorry about that. This is I always try to stress that this is a volunteer-run organization outside of Carrie. We want to give her a raise, but she doesn't let us because she does so much to really stabilize our organization, and without her, a lot of this wouldn't be possible. But truly for all of us within the team. Thank you so much for your dedication as well as your own advocacy. It's always greatly appreciated. So everyone, please give them a round of applause. I do want to give Lynn and Neville a shout out, although Lynn is probably just in the back, but they've allowed us to utilize their lovely space so many times this year. And it's really fantastic to operate out of this. So thank you very much, the Q on Hallett. Yay! But also a shout out to Electric Road team for being our media sponsor, media partners, and making sure we are able to capture a lot of these discussions, which, look, y'all, some of y'all repeat ASBN people, you all know that we really want to go viral, so help us do that. So when you get a hold of our content, make sure that you get it to some influential people. Yeah. And on that note, we still have the space for a little bit of time, so you're not rushed out the door. However, it would be appreciated if there is any food. We finish it out. We try to have a zero waste policy here. And if you haven't done your tokens, make sure you do that as well. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a fantastic evening.
Thanks.